Welcome everyone to our Food versus Forest webinar by Farley & Mitchell. My name is Malachy Mitchell. I'm the Managing Director of Farley & Mitchell. There's a lot of interest in this very important area and regulation, which has just been introduced by the EU in June of this year and will take effect over the next 18 to 24 months. It's known as the European Union Regulation on Deforestation-Free Products, or EUDR. This is part of the wider EU Green Deal and represents another regulatory step to reduce deforestation and degradation and ensure also, importantly, long-term sustainability and environmental practices in food and agriculture. In this webinar, we wish to answer three important questions. One is, what does this regulation mean for European and global food and agribusiness? What will the impact be on industry value chains? And we'll have an example from Ghana. And also, how can digitalization play a role in the implementation and compliance of the regulation? I also want to introduce our speakers. I'm delighted that we have three excellent speakers here with us today that will help us to illuminate on the topic and answer these questions. First is my colleague, Dr. Michelle Riblet, who is the Director at Farley & Mitchell and heads our Global Food Systems team. Michelle and our team works in the policy and regulation area in terms of development, implementation and implications across the food system. So at this stage, we'll hand over to you, Michelle, and maybe you would start your presentation and provide an outline of the EUDR regulation and its implications across the food system. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Malachy, and welcome to everybody on the webinar. So I'll just share my screen, and as Malachy said, I will go through the regulation on deforestation, the EU regulation, and what that means. Okay, so the next, I suppose, 10 minutes will cover the regulation itself, the broad aims of the regulation and its implications really for you as an operator or a regulator, indeed, either. So as Malachy mentioned earlier on, the regulation was introduced earlier this year. So it's known as Regulation 2023-1115, and the aim of this regulation is to reduce global deforestation and forest degradation. So we know that from the data there's a huge, I suppose, link with both EU consumption of specific products linked to deforestation and caused by both the forestry industry and the agricultural industry. So this legislation, which is falling as, I suppose, another very important initiative under the Green Deal, this aims to really reduce that and also to give, I suppose, the European customers in particular knowledge that products, particularly the 7 categories of products that that's listed in this legislation, that they will be coming from sustainable supply chains, and that the consumption of those will be sustainably produced. So in terms of implementation of the legislation, while it's been introduced in June of this year, there is, I suppose, up until December 2024 for larger enterprises will have to comply by this date, and then a little bit more time in terms of implementation from both the micro and the small enterprises. So that's not until June 2025. So the main goal is to reduce global deforestation by ensuring that products traded into the EU or those types, similar products exported from the EU are produced in a sustainable way. And therefore, businesses will have to adapt their supply chain to comply with the new requirements if they wish to continue to trade into a very, I suppose, important and lucrative market for them, which is the EU market. So in terms of why, and what's I suppose the data telling us in terms of the implications of what we've seen today and what has been done in terms of deforestation linked with the consumption of these particular sectors or products from these sectors. So we know that EU consumption of specific goods, which are listed in this legislation, are considerable drivers of deforestation. Both deforestation and forest degradation are important drivers of climate change and biodiversity loss, which are two key environmental challenges of our time. So this really is, I suppose, the biggest reason why the Commission wants to address, while a lot of initiatives are happening at the country level in terms of where that deforestation is taking place, the Commission wished to address this through giving, I suppose, this legislative approach to those products that are coming in and being sold in the EU market. So we know from the FAO that approximately 420 million hectares of forest were lost to deforestation over a 30-year period. And this is, I suppose, a huge net area loss, sometimes some areas equivalent to triple the size of France. So we know there's a lot has been done in terms of damage, and I suppose this is really the initiative being to reduce that and I suppose ensure that products being imported are not linked to any deforestation linked back to December 2020. So by promoting the consumption of deforestation-free products and reducing the EU's impact on global forest, this legislation intends to bring down greenhouse gas emissions, which are resulting from deforestation, and then assist in that very important fight against global biodiversity loss. So let's talk, I suppose, about those 7 key commodities that are really important and are considered those very high-risk products that have been associated with significant environmental and social impacts, and that are in particular called out on this in this legislation. So they are coffee, cocoa, cattle, soya, palm oil, timber, and rubber. So these products, or any derivative products from these categories, such as chocolate, leather, beef, etc., they will really need to have very solid traceability systems and verification of true due diligence statements to say that they're not linked with deforestation. So this is really, I suppose, a lot of new requirements for traders and operators, and it does apply to those operators or traders that are placing these types of products and bringing them into the EU market. So in terms of the legislation and in particular its requirements, firstly, I suppose broadly there's a prohibition on any products coming into the EU which are linked with deforestation. So in order to, I suppose, prove that your products which you wish to place on the EU market are not linked with deforestation, you need to have a very solid due diligence statement, which is a statement that you make as an operator or trader and declaring that these products have negligible risk of being linked with deforestation. So this is a significant piece of the legislation. And then in order to achieve this due diligence statement, businesses will need to have risk assessment mechanisms in place and risk mitigation planning in place. In terms of risk assessment mechanisms, we know that the Commission are categorizing countries on a three-tier, using a three-tier approach. So they will categorize countries as being of low risk, of medium or standard risk, and of being of high risk country. So each country will be categorized under one of these categories. At the moment, there is a process under a benchmarking process underway in which the Commission will then assign those risk categorizations to the countries, and that will be completed by December 2024. But for the moment, all countries are categorized as standard risk. In terms of risk mitigation planning, policies, documented policies and procedures need to be put in place within organizations to ensure that there is a process of looking at risk and mitigating against risk and against links with deforestation. Also additional needs in terms of resources, in particular compliance officers, to verify that these systems are being implemented and are correct and are effective in assessing risk, and also a function to have an audit function within or available to the organizations as well. So these, I suppose, are the requirements which will cost money, which will cost additional resources, and will have that additional either direct or indirect costs to the businesses. Penalties are also laid out in the legislation, of course, in order to drive compliance, and they cover both fines, exclusions, prohibitions, and confiscations. So if we look, I suppose, broadly at the 6 key categories in terms of trade and supply into the EU, we know that there are specific countries which are really going to be impacted and are, I suppose, at risk due to the level of products that they're producing or placing on the market from these countries. And also, I suppose, due to the fact that they've been already linked with deforestation. So if we look at cocoa, countries like West Africa, in particular Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana and Cameroon being associated and needing to have these systems in place. And Michael will talk to us a little bit more about this particular sector then from the Ghana perspective, which was very interesting to hear. In terms of palm oil, high producing countries exporting directly into this market are Indonesia and Malaysia. Coffee coming from Brazil and Vietnam, soya as well coming from that part of the world, Brazil and the United States. Beef, similar regions, Argentina and Brazil, and then rubber, Indonesia and Cote d'Ivoire. So we see, I suppose, from the global trade of these types of products into the EU and existing deforestation problems in these regions, then these will be the regions which will be likely to be impacted. So I suppose the purpose of the webinar today is to talk about and bring together some of the key stakeholders in order to achieve compliance with the regulation. So obviously the regulation is an additional piece, I suppose, introduces additional requirements for businesses, for traders, for operators, but it can be, I suppose, seen as also future-proofing the businesses in terms of standing over sustainability, standing over traceability, and really being able to help businesses in these particular chains look to strengthening their the sustainability within their supply chains. So in particular, the regulators, so obviously I'm talking here now from the regulatory point of view, from the policy and legislation that is now in place at EU level and what needs to be complied with, but also from the individual farmers or operators or traders point of view. And Michael will talk to us about this perspective from that point of view. How do we achieve compliance, and what sort of engagement or collaboration is needed from the farmer level or as a national approach, what needs to be done in order to, I suppose, support all of these actors within the chain achieve compliance. And then in particular, technology providers. So we'll see later from Andreas the real need for digitalization, in particular for the mapping of farms and plots of farms, is really going to be driven, compliance is going to be driven through digitalization. So really what we bring today is to talk about the need for trusted technology providers to then support the development of internal team competencies and to drive the, I suppose, the competency piece within the organizations, and then the need for that collaborative approach to achieving compliance.